Dr. Shabir, welcome to Let the Quran Speak.
Good to be here.
It's funny because this series is about Hadith and how Muslims should approach the Hadith, but we end up talking about the Quran a lot of the time as well, Dr. Shabir. So we want to understand how to view the Quran and the Hadith together. Which one should take precedence? And I understand, Dr. Shabir, that you believe, and many scholars agree with you, that the Quran should take precedence over the Hadith, and that maybe that balance has kind of been overturned in recent times. So, Dr. Shabir, maybe let's look at the Quran and what the Quran itself says about how it should be perceived by Muslims.
Yeah, so the Quran presents itself as the number one. There's no doubt about it. The Quran, it tells us right at the very beginning, ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ. This is the book in which there is no doubt. And the Quran throughout is saying that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, himself has to follow the Quran. And he is not allowed to deviate from the Quran. This is why Imam Shafi, rahimahullah, is noted to have said that if we know what the Quran is, or what the Quran says, we know that that was the way of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So somebody may be thinking, okay, let's find out what is the sunnah of the Prophet, meaning what was his regular practice. So Imam Shafi say, if you know what the Quran says, you know that's the sunnah, because he wouldn't have done something different, because he couldn't. He was
the Quran actually says that to the Prophet Muhammad that he cannot deviate.
Exactly. And we should have that appreciation of our Prophet, peace be upon him, as one who actually followed the Quran. And Aisha, the mother of the believers, described the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, as the walking Quran. He was the Quran in motion. So whatever the Quran said, that's what he did. And Muslims have to do the same thing. And of course, this message is not lost on the average Muslim. For the average Muslim, the Quran is our number one. And it's so obvious. Like, what do we recite in our prayers? We recite the Quran. And, there's a portion of our daily regular prayers in which only the Quran could be recited. You cannot recite something else. Now, you have other portions of the prayer in which things that we learned from the Prophet, peace be upon him, are recited. But that Quran portion cannot be replaced by something else. Now, during the month of Ramadan, we recite the entire Quran from memory, usually, in many of the mosques throughout the world. And only the Quran can be recited at that time. And people are gathering to hear the entire Quran being recited. Now, we might have commentaries, and we could mention hadith and so on, but they will be outside of the prayer. They'll be in the breaks between the cycles of the Taraweeh or the night prayer. So Muslims are devoted to the Quran in this way. So Muslims will be trying to recite the entire Quran, either during the month of Ramadan by reading a portion each day so that all 30 portions are completed during the month, or some will try to, have a yearly reading of the Quran, a few pages a day, so you read the entire Quran in a year. But hardly does anyone take it upon themselves, okay, we're going to make a khatam, which is the word meaning completion. We're going to make a khatam of the hadith. In fact, you wouldn't know where to end with the hadith, because not just one volume, several volumes, and that's just talking about one book. So Bukhari in the English rendering is in 8 volumes, and Muslim in English is 4 volumes, and so on. So, and then Abu Dawud is in 3 volumes in English, Tirmidhi in 2. So when are you going to, where do you stop reading the hadith? But the Quran is a well-defined book. Muslims know this, and for the average Muslim, the Quran is number one. But we will see later that some Muslim scholars, contrary to this common sense that Muslims have in general, might think that the hadith actually trumps the Quran. But for the average Muslim, this is well known. And in principle, Muslim scholars should have no difficulty acknowledging this if they leave aside the later influences that happen in our history. The Quran itself is calling upon us Muslims to follow the Quran, not deviate from it, to recognize that this is the book of truth, and so on. Nothing like this comes close to what we can say about the hadith.
Now, Dr. Shabir, what about the hadith themselves? Do they say anything about the kind of positioning of the Quran compared to the hadith?
Yes, among the hadiths, as with many subjects, you have a variety of varied influences that leave their mark on the narrative. So let's say emerging later in Muslim society, there is this tension between groups. Some people emphasizing what they know from the Quran, some people emphasizing what they remember from the life narratives about the Prophet, peace be upon him. Then some people are starting to emphasize the Quran. Okay, it's the Quran only. Some people are starting to emphasize the Hadith. No, the Hadith is more important even than the Quran, and you cannot leave the Hadith. So these tensions remain to this day, but they were very early as well. And when we read the Hadith, we must keep these tensions in mind and don't think that they're new tensions. They have been there among human beings. Human nature has not really changed that much. So the tension existed, and you can see this tension reflected. And on the one hand, there are people stressing that the Prophet, peace be upon him, left nothing except the Quran. So there's a hadith in Sahih al-Bukhari saying, "Ma taraka Rasulullahi illa ma bayna daffatayn." The Prophet, peace be upon him, did not leave anything except that which is between the two covers. And this is an obvious reference to the Quran, because by this time the Quran has been compiled. It is known as a codex. It is in two well-defined covers, so we know the contents of the Quran, whereas the Hadith is all loose and scattered. Okay, so this is one narrative saying the Prophet, peace be upon him, did not leave anything except the Quran. And on the other hand, you have a narrative saying that the Prophet, peace be upon him, said in his last sermon, "I'm leaving with you two things, which if you hold on to them, you will never go astray. Kitab Allah wa sunnati, the book of God, and my sunnah, which is the Prophet's general practice, which we will know from the hadiths, which are individual narratives." But that's only one version of the hadith. On the other hand, you have another version that says that the Prophet, peace be upon him, said, I'm leaving with you two things, which if you're to hold on to them, you will never go astray. So far, it looks like the same, right? But then the clincher. The two things now are the book of God and Ahl Bayti, the people of my family. Now, you can see that this reflects a tension that still exists among Muslims, some holding on to the Quran and the Sunnah. These are called the Sunnis. And then those who are holding on to the Quran and the family of the Prophet, peace be upon him, these are called the Shi'is. So this was an early tension that was already there by the time the hadiths were being collected in the early centuries of Islam, and it's reflected in these narratives. So what we can say is that if we're to piece these together, which we must always do in a variety of topics, we will see that there is something of an original statement that branches out to become two different things. So it looks like in this case, the Prophet or some of the companions of the Prophet, peace be upon him, may have calmly recollected and said that in terms of writing, the Prophet, peace be upon him, left us only one thing, which is the Quran. Even if you had some scattered pieces of writing, let's say the Prophet wrote a letter to the kings of his time and so on, and then you have some pieces of writing. But basically, the written document that the Prophet, peace be upon him, gave us, his manifesto, is the Quran. And then later on, people are saying, "Oh, but what about the Sunnah? We must have that too." And so the saying got changed to Quran and Sunnah. And then some people are thinking, but wait a minute, it's not so much the Sunnah of the Muslims in general, but the Sunnah of the Ahlul Bayt, the people of the Prophet's household, because they are the prime exemplars that we should follow, the people who were closer to the Prophet, peace be upon him. They knew him best. And so we have the saying going in that direction, saying it is the Quran and the people of the Prophet's household that should be followed. You see these various tensions, and they're reflected in the hadith narratives. But in short, we should not lose sight of the fact that it is the Quran that is our number one document. That is the thing that the Prophet, peace be upon him, received from God as a book of guidance that he lived. And yes, we're going to follow the Prophet, peace be upon him. We're going to follow the people of the Prophet's household and his companions in general. But number one should always be the Quran, which is the book of God. And in keeping that in mind, we will maintain the balance that is necessary in following hadith.
Thank you for that, Dr. Shabir.
The most effective and far-reaching dawah we can do these days is on social media. That's why we're developing the Muslim Media Hub. We're harnessing the power of media to spread the message of Islam. Please support this project at QuranSpeaks.com and share in the reward from God.